She froze at the foot of the long driveway, her hands clutching a worn leather folder that felt heavier than it should. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of blooming magnolias, and the grand estate ahead glittered under strings of golden lights. Music and laughter floated out from behind the massive doors, a sound meant for another world, one she was certain she did not belong in. Her phone buzzed again, the email glaring back at her interview with Daniel Cole, 7:00 p.m. at Cole Estate. She reread it for the third time, willing herself to believe she had not misread the address. Every step toward the entrance made her stomach twist tighter, as if the heels on her feet were a tether to the fear curling in her chest. She had come for a job, yet the room beyond promised champagne, tuxedos, and expectations she had never prepared for. She felt small, absurd, painfully visible under the chandeliers. And yet, a strange curiosity pulled her forward, mingled with the quiet hope that maybe this wrong door could lead to something she never imagined. If you've ever walked through a door you weren't sure was meant for you, this story might feel familiar. Let's begin. The chandelier above her threw a soft golden light across the entry hall, and for a moment, Evelyn thought the world had tilted beneath her feet. She stood just inside the doorway, her outdated navy blazer buttoned tight across her ribs and a worn leather folder clutched to her chest. The warmth from the room pressed against her face, but her hands stayed cold. She stared at the glowing scene before her, trying to steady her breath, trying to make sense of the sight. 2 minutes earlier, she had been standing at the bottom of the long, curving driveway, squinting up at the Cole Estate through a veil of mist. The place looked unreal, more like a museum than a house, and she kept checking the email on her phone, as if the words might suddenly rearrange themselves into something less intimidating. Interview with Daniel Cole, 7:00 p.m. at Cole Estate. The line pulsed on the screen like a dare. She had reread it so many times she could recite it, yet stepping through those doors still felt like trespassing. But nothing in that brief message prepared her for what waited inside. Music drifted from a live string quartet near the grand staircase. Women in floor-length gowns swept across the marble floor like moving color. Men in tuxedos laughed in low, easy voices. Crystal glasses chimed together under chandeliers that looked too delicate to be real. There were photographers, actual photographers, circling the room, as if expecting a celebrity to emerge any moment. This wasn't an interview. This was a world. Her sensible heels echoed strangely on the marble, too sharp against the soft hum of conversation. A few guests glanced her way, the kind of look people give when something doesn't fit the picture. She felt her posture stiffen, her fingers tightening around the folder. She had spent nearly an hour choosing the blazer, wanting to look professional enough, yet now it made her feel like a school teacher who had wandered into an awards show. A hot flush crept up her throat. She had copied the address wrong. She must have. She imagined the real interview location miles away, her potential co-workers waiting for a woman who was currently making a spectacle of herself in a billionaire's ballroom. This is what happens when you think too highly of yourself. A familiar old voice whispered from the back of her mind. It was the voice she tried to bury after her divorce, the voice of every dismissal she'd swallowed at her old job, the voice that always reminded her she was lucky to be considered at all. She tried to breathe deeply, but her chest stayed tight. She moved toward a tall arrangement of white lilies near the wall, hoping to look like she belonged to something, anything other than the growing pool of embarrassment inside her. Behind her, laughter soared in a cheerful, effortless arc that made her feel even smaller. She searched the faces in the room for someone who looked like an HR manager or a hiring coordinator, but all she saw were donors in designer clothes. Her heart thudded harder. Maybe this was a test. Maybe it was a prank. Or maybe someone on Daniel Cole's staff had made an honest mistake, one she was now paying for with her dignity. Her eyes drifted toward the door. If she left now, maybe no one would notice. She could email later, explain there must have been some misunderstanding. She could salvage a sliver of her pride. A woman in a glittering silver dress brushed past her, the perfume sharp and floral. Evelyn stepped aside quickly, murmuring an apology that no one heard. She felt like a stain on the perfect floor, something to be avoided without comment. Her feet began to turn toward the exit. She could almost feel the relief waiting on the other side of the door, the cold night air, the darkness, the safety of being unseen. That was when she heard it. Ma'am. The single word cut through the music and the laughter, soft but unmistakable. She froze mid-step, her breath trapped somewhere between her ribs. She didn't turn right away. For one suspended heartbeat, she hoped it wasn't meant for her, that someone else, someone who belonged here, would respond, but no one did. Slowly, she turned back toward the voice. Her eyes lifted, and the crowd seemed to shift just slightly, as if making space for the man now standing several feet away. He wasn't smiling, yet there was no sharpness in his expression either, just a calm, assessing stillness that made her pulse trip unexpectedly. He was tall, dressed in a tailored black suit that fit him effortlessly, and there was something about the way people around him fell into a quieter posture that suggested he was used to being at the center of attention. His gaze was steady, not unkind, but focused in a way that made her feel exposed. She couldn't tell whether he was about to ask her to leave or ask why she thought she could walk through that door in the first place. Her fingers tightened around the leather folder until the edge pressed into her palm. An old fear surged up, fear of misunderstanding, fear of being judged, fear of making the kind of mistake a woman her age wasn't supposed to make anymore. She swallowed hard, her voice barely forming. Yes, she managed. But he hadn't moved yet. He simply watched her with a quiet intent, one that made the chandelier's warm light seem suddenly too bright against her skin. For a moment, she wished she had never received that email, and yet another part of her, smaller, more stubborn, wondered why he had called out to her at all. "Ma'am, I think someone gave you the wrong door." The voice was calm, almost gentle, yet it cut through the soft buzz of conversation like a stone skipping across still water. Evelyn's stomach knotted instantly. She froze, the worn leather folder pressing against her chest, as if it were her only armor against the judgmental eyes around her. Slowly, she turned toward the source, expecting a frown or a pointed finger. Instead, a man stood there, tall, composed, with a quiet authority that seemed to bend the air around him. His gaze was steady, curious but not mocking. There was no arrogance, no hint of ridicule. Just a calm assessment that made Evelyn feel both exposed and strangely observed. She cleared her throat, attempting a small laugh, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. I think there might be some mistake," she murmured, holding up her phone like it could explain everything. The email glared at him from the screen interview with Daniel Cole, 7:20 p.m. at Cole Estate. He leaned slightly forward, scanning the email with an intensity that made her palms sweat. His jaw tightened when he saw the domain, the familiar company address, confirming what she already feared. It wasn't a prank. Someone on his staff had sent it. Evelyn felt the heat rise to her cheeks. She expected anger, a sharp dismissal, perhaps a lecture about professional boundaries. Instead, he offered her a measured nod and a soft, unexpected apology. "I'm sorry for the confusion," he said. The words hung in the air, astonishing her. Apology, not blame her. Instincts had braced for scorn, yet here was accountability, unhurried and precise. The room continued to swirl with guests in flowing gowns and stud-polished tuxedos, but the sounds seemed distant now, almost irrelevant. He gestured subtly toward the ballroom, where crystal glasses caught the chandelier light like captured stars. "Tonight is our annual Foundation Gala," he explained, his voice carrying a calm authority. "The interviews were meant to take place at our downtown office." He gave her a small, understanding smile, not dismissive but patient, as if he recognized both her effort and her vulnerability. Evelyn's mind raced. Anger bubbled quietly at the error, at the humiliation of standing there so obviously out of place. But it was quickly tempered by a deeper, more personal shame. She had arrived expecting competence and preparation, yet here she was, a fish out of water, clutching a leather folder like it might shield her from judgment. Every instinct told her to shrink back, to retreat, to vanish through the grand doors she had just entered. Yet, there was something in the way he spoke that invited her to remain. She fought the urge to fold inward, to apologize again for existing in this space. She needed this job more than she could admit to anyone, and now it seemed that walking away could cost her a chance she had been working toward for years. Evelyn drew a quiet, shaky breath, willing herself to find composure. He watched her, the calm in his presence grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. "Tell me," he said after a moment, "how do you handle things when they don't go according to plan?" The question was simple, but it carried a weight that pressed against her chest. It wasn't judgment, it was an invitation, a test she hadn't anticipated. His eyes held a quiet curiosity, and for the first time, Evelyn felt that perhaps she could meet it. Her fingers unclenched the edges of her folder. She thought of the long nights preparing presentations, the small victories in her previous office where her diligence went unnoticed, the moments she had proven herself capable under pressure, and yet quietly overlooked. This was a different kind of challenge, one where confidence and adaptability mattered more than any list of accomplishments on a resume. Her heartbeat thrummed like a drum in the echoing hall, and she realized that the stakes were higher than just a job. They were about dignity, about proving to herself that she could navigate unexpected chaos without crumbling. The music from the string quartet swirled around them, and for a moment, the room faded. She pictured the email again, its crisp font almost accusatory, a reminder of how a single misstep could expose her vulnerability. But then she noticed his eyes, not the distant, imperious gaze of someone used to commanding a room, but a direct, unflinching attention that seemed to ask for honesty. He was measuring her reaction, not scolding her, not laughing at her, simply seeing her in a way that mattered. Evelyn took a cautious step forward. Her voice, when it came, was steadier than she felt. I try to focus on what I can control," she said, "and figure out the rest as it comes." It was an answer she had given herself many times during moments of self-doubt, yet now it felt like a declaration, a small act of bravery in the glittering chaos around them. He inclined his head, a flicker of surprise passing across his features, quickly replaced by something like approval. "Good," he said. "That's exactly the kind of perspective I value. Most people freeze, most people leave. You," his gaze softened, "you stay." He stepped aside slightly, allowing her to move more freely in the room, yet his presence remained, a quiet anchor in the swirl of gowns, champagne, and muted laughter. Evelyn exhaled slowly, feeling a strange mix of relief and lingering embarrassment. She hadn't yet escaped ridicule, but neither had she been rejected outright. The tension in her chest ebbed just enough to allow a flicker of pride to emerge. She had faced the first wave of disorientation and humiliation with more poise than she expected. But the evening stretched ahead, unpredictable and vast, and she knew this was only the beginning. Every instinct told her to stay alert, to be ready for the next unexpected turn. The man glanced briefly toward the center of the room, then back at her. His eyes held a question she couldn't yet answer. Would she rise to meet the challenges unfolding tonight, or retreat into the comfort of apology and escape? The soft golden light from the chandeliers reflected off the crystal glasses, casting fractured patterns across her blazer. And for a moment, Evelyn felt as if she were standing on the edge of two worlds, the one she had prepared for, and the one she had stumbled into by accident. Her pulse quickened. She realized that this was more than a test of composure. It was a test of character, resilience, and courage. And as the distant laughter of guests swirled into the air, she understood that every step she took next would define whether she could claim a place in this unexpected, glittering world. The air hung heavy with possibility, and Evelyn's eyes met his, searching for guidance, searching for an answer that would tell her whether she was simply a mistake, or the kind of person who could thrive even when the world did not go as planned. Her mind flitted between fear and hope, the delicate balance of shame and audacity that made her chest ache. She was standing at the threshold, and the night had only just begun. Evelyn's fingers hovered over the tablet, her heart thumping against her ribcage as she glanced at the sea of impeccably dressed guests weaving through the grand hall. The chandeliers above sparkled like captured stars, their light reflecting off crystal flutes in the hands of men and women who seemed to glide effortlessly through the room. She felt suddenly small, the worn leather folder she had clutched now tucked safely under her arm, her black blazer feeling heavier than ever, out of place against the shimmer of evening gowns and tailored tuxedos. The soft notes of a string quartet floated through the air, yet the melody did nothing to calm the rapid drum of her pulse. Daniel Cole, standing just a few feet away, handed her a stack of papers and a tablet with a black lanyard. No fancy name badge, no introduction, no reassurance beyond a sharp nod. "My assistant called out an hour ago," he said quietly, his voice calm, almost clipped. "Guest check-in is chaotic. Auction software is glitching. I don't have time to reschedule. Tonight, you either handle it or you step aside." His gaze lingered on her with a weight that felt more like expectation than judgment. Evelyn swallowed hard, absorbing the enormity of the situation. The quiet panic in her chest battled with the flicker of resolve igniting at the base of her spine. Her mind raced. Mortgage payments she had been pinching pennies to cover. The cramped cubicle at her old office where she had spent endless hours hoping someone would notice her effort. A text from her daughter asking whether college funds would be ready next month. All of it collided with the dizzying opulence of the room, and for a moment, she wanted to step backward, disappear into the shadows, and pretend she had never arrived. But the email had said 7:20 p.m. at Cole Estate. She was here. Somehow, she had to make it count. Evelyn adjusted the tablet in her hands, fingertips damp with sweat. She scanned the guest list, noting names, affiliations, and table numbers, her stomach twisting as she realized how quickly mistakes could escalate. A woman's voice pierced her reverie. "My name's not on the list." The guest, a striking figure in a sapphire gown, glanced at her with impatience sharpened by wealth and expectation. Evelyn's heart lurched. Every instinct screamed to apologize, to admit she didn't belong, to retreat. But something steadied her, a quiet, stubborn determination she hadn't felt in months. She inhaled, forcing her hands to remain steady over the screen. Her eyes flicked across the list, then down, noticing a subtle misalignment, a whole column of names offset by a single row. Her pulse quickened, but instead of panic, a focused clarity took hold. She tapped, dragged, rearranged, double-checked, each movement precise and deliberate. The spreadsheet shifted under her touch, names falling into proper order like dominoes. When she looked up, the woman in sapphire had been waiting only a few seconds, her impatience melting into a nod of satisfaction as Evelyn confirmed the correct seating. The guest moved away, oblivious to how close Evelyn had come to faltering entirely. Daniel observed from across the room, his eyes sharp but not intrusive. He didn't intervene, didn't guide, yet every now and then she felt the weight of his quiet attention, the subtle acknowledgement of her capability. It bolstered her, an unspoken reassurance that, despite the chaos, she was not entirely adrift. She felt the first flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself in weeks' pride, tempered by anxiety. Her pulse was a steady drum now, not just of fear, but of resolve. Each table, each guest, each request became a test of composure. Servers approached with trays of hors d'oeuvres. Guests inquired about auction items, and the hum of polite conversation became a cacophony in her mind. Yet, with every small success, resolving a question, confirming a name, calming a frazzled staff member, she carved out a tiny space for herself in the room, a place where she belonged, at least for this one night. She caught snippets of conversations about stock investments, charitable pledges, and art acquisitions, all seemingly alien worlds. Yet she found herself listening, absorbing, and navigating with a cautious confidence she hadn't realized she possessed. A gentle touch on her shoulder startled her. It was Daniel, holding a small device she had yet to familiarize herself with. "Here," he said softly. "If something goes wrong, you'll know." His presence was grounding, yet a subtle weight of expectation clung to every word. Evelyn nodded, grateful for the minimal guidance, but acutely aware that the night's success rested largely on her ability to improvise, to think quickly, and to remain composed under scrutiny. The room, a dazzling blur of champagne, laughter, and glinting jewelry, suddenly felt like a gauntlet. Yet Evelyn's determination had hardened. She reminded herself that this was temporary, that she could survive this night, and perhaps even impress the man who had, by mere circumstance, thrown her into the deep end. She took another breath, her chest tightening with anticipation, and dove fully into the task before her. She scanned the next portion of the list, anticipating issues before they arose. When a young man approached, flustered and clutching an invitation he claimed was misplaced, she was ready, quick thinking, clear instructions, and a steady demeanor guided him to his correct seat, leaving him satisfied and unaware of the nearly catastrophic confusion she had just navigated. Evelyn allowed herself a fleeting smile, a small spark of triumph before the next challenge presented itself. The night stretched on, each minute a test of adaptability, patience, and quiet courage, every minor victory resolving a glitch, confirming a last-minute change, calming an anxious guest built upon the last, and she began to feel a tenuous rhythm in the chaos. Yet the underlying tension never fully dissipated. The stakes of the evening pressed on her like an invisible weight. Could she maintain this poise? Could she continue to adapt in a world defined by wealth, expectations, and fleeting judgment, all while standing in the shadow of a man who seemed to see everything? Her pulse thrummed with anxiety and determination, each beat a reminder that the night's outcome rested squarely on her shoulders. A soft murmur of approval from Daniel as he passed by was brief, but it carried a current of acknowledgement that sent a shiver through her. Evelyn's mind raced ahead, anticipating potential snafus, recalculating seating arrangements, preparing for every contingency she could imagine. She was fully aware that every small decision now could determine whether she survived the evening's social labyrinth or crumbled under its weight. And yet, in the quiet spaces between chaos, she felt the faint pulse of exhilaration, a recognition that she was capable, resourceful, and, for the first time in months, fully alive to the challenge before her. As the string quartet shifted into a gentle waltz, Evelyn paused for a moment, glancing at the glittering hall around her. Could she truly keep improvising in this room built on expectations, status, and wealth without breaking? The thought lingered, pressing against her chest as she steeled herself for the next test, knowing that the evening was far from over. Evelyn's eyes widened as she approached the towering man at the end of the table, his sharp gaze flicking toward her with unmistakable irritation. The air around them had grown taut, crystal glasses clinked in nervous anticipation, and the soft murmur of conversations seemed to stiffen into a pointed silence. "Ma'am, are you telling me my name doesn't matter, enough to sit where I was promised?" The man's voice rang across the marble floor, commanding attention. His wife, a woman in a deep burgundy gown, crossed her arms and let out a thin laugh of disbelief. All eyes subtly pivoted toward Evelyn, the figure of authority in this corner of the grand hall, though she felt anything but authoritative. A familiar churn of anxiety bubbled in her stomach. She had felt this before, in offices where minor errors became personal indictments, in conference rooms where one misstep could shadow her entire week. She remembered staying late to refile someone else's mismanaged reports, swallowing her frustration to fix problems she hadn't created. Tonight, the stakes felt infinitely higher, magnified by wealth, social expectation, and the subtle judgment of a crowd trained to notice the smallest misalignment. Evelyn steadied her trembling hands over the tablet, scanning the live seating chart projected on its screen. She could see immediately where the discrepancy had occurred. A simple misalignment of tables had thrown the donor's reservation off by 2 seats. It was minor. Yet, in a room like this, minor was magnified into a social slight. She inhaled deeply, forcing calm into her chest and shoulders, reminding herself she had chosen to stay in this room, to face discomfort rather than retreat. Her mind flicked back to Daniel's presence across the room. He was watching, yes, but deliberately still, letting her navigate the tension on her own. That quiet confidence was unnerving, yet invigorating. Evelyn squared her shoulders, lifting her voice just enough to address the couple without hesitation. "Sir, I believe we can adjust the seating without upsetting the arrangement. If you would allow me a moment, I can propose a solution that honors both your table assignment and the preferences of the other guests." Her words, measured and calm, seemed to slow the pulse of the room itself. The donor's eyes narrowed, skepticism etched in every line of his face. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She had moments, no, seconds to act. She swiped through the digital chart, realigning names, shifting a couple of seats here, swapping a chair there. Each adjustment was precise, almost like playing chess in real time, anticipating how each move would ripple across the intricate social web of the gala. She held her breath, waiting for the reaction, hoping her solution would land before the air grew too charged to recover. Perhaps. The donor began cautiously, his tone softening. That could work. Relief rippled through Evelyn's chest, tight and sharp. She executed the final swap and gestured toward the corrected seating, her voice steady but quiet. "Here, this will allow everyone to sit where they were promised while keeping adjacent seats for your guests' comfort." The couple paused, exchanged a glance, and then, unexpectedly, the donor inclined his head. "Thank you. That's considerate." His wife's posture relaxed, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them. A small victory, quietly won, but monumental in its personal significance. Evelyn exhaled, feeling the tension leave her body in a slow wave. She had faced the gaze of the crowd, taken responsibility without defensiveness, and navigated an impossible social pressure with poise. Her mind buzzed with a mix of adrenaline and satisfaction, realizing for the first time that she could command respect, even in a room that felt designed to highlight outsiders. Her palms still lingered on the tablet, warm with exertion, as she allowed herself a brief, almost imperceptible smile. From across the hall, Daniel's movement caught her eye. He passed by with the faintest tilt of his head, a small, controlled acknowledgement that carried far more weight than words. "You didn't need rescuing, did you?" he asked quietly, his voice threading through the ambient chatter, grounding and precise. Evelyn felt a sudden, disorienting warmth. It was more than professional approval, it was recognition, subtle yet profoundly validating. Her chest tightened, her mind skimming over the possibility that his eyes held a measure of something more personal, something she hadn't been invited to define yet. The orchestra shifted softly in the background, the music weaving between tension and celebration, mirroring the rapid oscillation of her thoughts. She knew she was not done. The night was far from over, and each success carried with it a new layer of expectation. She would need to continue improvising, responding, adjusting, all while maintaining composure and navigating the intricate social hierarchy that the gala demanded. Yet, in the midst of this whirlwind, Evelyn felt a quiet steadiness begin to take root. She had survived the immediate storm and, in doing so, glimpsed a version of herself capable of rising to the challenge, unflinching. As she glanced back at the couple now chatting quietly, faces softened and the subtle nods of acknowledgement from nearby guests, Evelyn realized that her small victory had larger implications. Each choice she made rippled outward, shaping perceptions, altering dynamics. It was intoxicating, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. Could she maintain this careful balance throughout the rest of the evening? The thought lingered in the pit of her stomach, mixing with the subtle thrill of agency she hadn't known she possessed. She returned to the tablet, scanning the next cluster of names, rehearsing quietly in her mind how she would intervene if another discrepancy arose. The memory of the donor's relieved smile replayed in her head, each repetition solidifying the quiet confidence blooming within her. She knew the evening would continue to test her, but for the first time since stepping through those towering doors, she felt the subtle pulse of control, the delicate, exhilarating awareness that she could meet challenge with poise. and that her presence in this room was not entirely accidental. Yet, as Daniel disappeared from view behind a cluster of guests, Evelyn's thoughts lingered on his words. Why did that simple nod and understated acknowledgement feel more significant than any praise she had ever received? Her chest tightened with curiosity and the faint stirrings of something unspoken, a question she could not yet articulate. The night stretched on before her, glittering and demanding, and Evelyn braced herself for whatever challenge would arrive next, pulse quickened, yet quietly triumphant. Evelyn stepped out onto the terrace, the cool night air immediately brushing against her flushed cheeks. The hum of the gala softened behind her, replaced by the distant murmur of the city, lights stretching like a scattered constellation beneath her. Her heels clicked unevenly on the stone tiles, and she sank into a wrought iron chair, letting her bag slide from her shoulder. After hours of corralling misplaced guests, adjusting seating charts, and fielding polite but sharp complaints, her legs ached as though every step of her life's past had collected in her calves. She closed her eyes, inhaling the crisp air, trying to shake the weight of social expectation pressing down like the chandelier she'd just left under. The night had been relentless, a gauntlet of silent judgments, whispered critiques, and her own self-recrimination. She thought of her life before the divorce, of mornings spent in a quiet house, half empty, half forgotten, where conversations had dwindled to polite nods over breakfast. Those years had been steady, predictable, yet lonely in ways that gnawed at her unnoticed. Here, under the city lights, it all seemed to catch up at once, the choices she'd made, the paths abandoned, the quiet ache of independence that sometimes felt like exile. A soft click drew her attention. Daniel appeared at the terrace entrance, 2 steaming cups in hand, no champagne, no fanfare, just the simple, grounding gesture of warmth and caffeine. He offered her one with a small, almost shy smile. "Thought you might need this?" he said, the faintest crease of concern at the corner of his eyes. Evelyn took it, fingers brushing the rim, noting how his hands, steady and assured, contrasted with her own jittering pulse. For a moment, the noise of the gala and the weight of expectation felt miles away. They sat in companionable silence, letting the city stretch beneath them like a reminder of lives unfolding elsewhere. Finally, Daniel spoke, voice low and reflective. "Sorry about the mix-up tonight. I didn't expect someone to handle it like you did." His words weren't praise, exactly. They were a recognition of effort and presence. Evelyn blinked, not used to such acknowledgement without an implicit critique lurking behind it. She sipped her coffee, letting its warmth seep into her cold fingers. "It wasn't perfect," she said quietly, the words sounding more like a confession than a claim. "I was out of my element." She tilted her head, studying the city lights, and found herself confessing before she could stop. "I've spent a lot of time trying to just survive. Blend in, not rock the boat." The vulnerability in her voice startled her. She wasn't sure Daniel was the type to care about such personal revelations. Yet she continued, the honesty rolling off her tongue almost without resistance. "My marriage ended quietly. 17 years, just gone, like a door closing behind me." He listened, and in that listening, there was no interruption, no checking of a watch, no shifting weight toward an exit, just attention, steady and unjudging. His presence was curious, not invasive, a contrast to the constant evaluation she had grown accustomed to in corporate spaces. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," he admitted, his voice low, almost hesitant, as though releasing a long-held truth into the night air. "It doesn't get easier with time. You just carry it differently." Evelyn felt a strange ease settle over her. There was no judgment, no need to apologize for feelings long buried, or mistakes long forgiven in private reflection. I wasn't expecting to talk about any of this tonight," she said, a trace of wonder in her voice. "I didn't even know you could understand." He shook his head faintly, a wry, weary smile tugging at his lips. "It's not about understanding everyone," he said. "It's about noticing when someone shows up fully, even when it's inconvenient. Most people here came to be seen. You're the only one who came here to work. That matters more to me than the dress you're wearing." The words struck a chord deeper than she anticipated, reverberating through the careful armor she had built around herself. She felt both exposed and acknowledged in a way she hadn't felt in years. The ache from her feet, the tension from the gala, the unrelenting social dance, all of it receded into the night air as a soft hum of understanding settled between them. For a moment, she allowed herself to simply exist, to be present, without the familiar companion of anxiety clawing at her chest. Daniel's eyes scanned the terrace as if noticing the city for the first time that night, and she followed his gaze. "I hate these events," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper, carrying both confession and a subtle invitation to trust. "Even though I host them, they feel performative. But you made it feel like it mattered, not for the spectacle, but for the work, the effort. That's rare." Evelyn's chest tightened, a delicate mix of pride and disbelief. Here was a man with every reason to measure her worth with scrutiny, instead offering a quiet acknowledgement that seemed impossibly to recognize her whole self. The weight of years spent measuring, doubting, and concealing emotions began to lift in small increments. It was fragile, fleeting, yet profound. They talked quietly about the mix-up, the logistics, and the unglamorous details that had made her hands shake earlier. And then, as the conversation drifted naturally toward more personal terrain, the night's glow seemed to deepen around them. Evelyn realized she could speak of her past, her losses, and the quiet triumphs she'd survived without feeling diminished. There was something tender in this shared space, an unexpected connection amid a room built on appearances and whispered judgments. She looked up at Daniel, eyes reflecting the scattered city lights. For a fleeting moment, she questioned what she was feeling: gratitude, relief, curiosity, or something far more dangerous. "Is this just about the work?" she asked softly, hesitant. The question hung in the air, threaded with vulnerability. His gaze met hers with a subtle intensity, unreadable yet magnetic. Evelyn's heart thumped against her ribs, uncertain whether she had crossed a boundary or found a rare, unspoken understanding. The terrace wind carried the faint scent of the city and the echoes of laughter from inside, but Evelyn's attention stayed riveted on him. There was something in the calm of his presence that made her feel seen, recognized, almost entirely. Yet uncertainty lingered, a tender, uneasy hum. Was this simply gratitude from a boss, or the first crack in a heart that had been closed too long? The question refused an answer as Daniel's hand gestured toward the empty table nearby. The steam from the coffee swirled in lazy spirals, the night's lights casting long, soft shadows across their faces. Evelyn lifted her cup slowly, savoring warmth that was more than just physical, wondering how long this fragile connection could hold before the gala's chaos resumed its relentless momentum. Evelyn's hand lingered on the sleek glass handle of the revolving door as she stepped into Cole Industries. The lobby's polished marble floor reflected the morning light, slicing through the open atrium in sharp, brilliant streaks. She felt a twinge of disbelief, an almost guilty awe, as if she had wandered into someone else's life by accident. Elevator doors opened before her with a soft chime, revealing floor-to-ceiling windows framing the bay beyond. A view that felt impossibly vast and far removed from her tiny apartment in the suburbs. From the grocery coupons she still clipped out of habit, she adjusted her blazer, mentally rehearsing her introduction as the lift carried her upward. The hum of the machinery felt like a heartbeat, pulsing in time with her own racing nerves. When the doors opened to the 32nd floor, she was greeted by Linda, Daniel's longtime senior assistant, a woman in her early 60s whose posture carried decades of precision and authority. Linda's gray hair was pulled into a neat bun, and her eyes scanned Evelyn like a hawk assessing a fledgling. "You must be Evelyn," she said briskly, though there was a softness in her tone. "I'll be guiding you today. Let's see if you can keep pace." Evelyn swallowed, nodding, trying not to betray the fluttering in her stomach. She had imagined stepping into the CEO's office 100 times, but the reality, a symphony of efficiency, urgency, and unspoken expectation, was both exhilarating and terrifying. Linda guided her through a maze of glass-walled conference rooms and sleek desks, each humming with activity. Evelyn's eyes darted to young staffers moving with sharp precision, their shoes clicking in rhythm with the corporate tempo. She felt, momentarily, like a guest wandering into someone else's meticulously rehearsed play. Linda handed her a folder filled with Daniel's calendar, itineraries, and a handful of cryptic notes. "You'll shadow me today," she explained, her brisk tone leaving no room for hesitation. "Keep up, ask when necessary, and observe. Most importantly, anticipate." Evelyn nodded, taking in the weight of responsibility, feeling the pulse of anxiety in her chest. Every small error tonight could echo through the corridors of power, a single misstep magnified by proximity to the CEO. The morning was a blur of introductions, emails, and phone calls. Evelyn's fingers danced across the keyboard, juggling schedules and fielding questions she didn't fully understand yet. She noticed Daniel moving through his office with a commanding presence, the kind that seemed to bend the room around him. Sharp commands, rapid decisions, calm authority. This was Daniel in his element, far removed from the man she had shared a quiet terrace with just days earlier. She admired him, but the contrast rattled her, and for the first time, she questioned if she could really match the pace expected of someone in his orbit. Midday arrived with its usual flurry. A client called about a meeting that had inexplicably disappeared from Daniel's calendar, the voice tight with irritation and anticipation. Evelyn's stomach dropped. A misstep here could unravel everything. She rifled through the digital folders, scanning timestamps, confirming emails, retracing Daniel's steps with careful attention. After a tense moment, her eyes caught the missing entry tucked under a misfiled note. A few clicks, a confirmation, and the meeting was back on the schedule. She exhaled quietly, aware that the client would never know how close the chaos had come to erupting. Linda glanced over her glasses, eyebrows raised in rare approval. "Nicely done," she said, the faintest nod of recognition that carried more weight than words. Evelyn's chest tightened, not with relief alone, but with the fragile bloom of confidence. She had navigated the first major trial without catastrophe, yet the unease lingered. This was only the beginning. 1,000 small errors could still follow, each one capable of pulling her back under the tide of self-doubt. The afternoon passed in a relentless stream of tasks, rescheduling meetings, coordinating travel arrangements, reviewing contracts. Evelyn's hands ached from typing, her eyes ached from scanning endless documents, and yet a quiet determination settled over her. Each decision, each correction, was a small claim staked in a world that had once felt inaccessible. She reminded herself of her previous victories, the ability to adapt under pressure, the sharp instincts honed through years of meticulous work in a smaller firm. Those instincts were now her lifeline. During a brief pause, she found herself watching Daniel from across the room. He was reviewing a report, brow furrowed, posture rigid yet poised. There was a gravity to his movements, a precision that commanded attention. She realized that working alongside him would require not only skill but composure, a steady presence in the midst of constant expectation. The challenge both intimidated and inspired her. Could she maintain this focus for 90 days, she wondered. Without faltering, could she meet the demands of a man whose life and company moved at this relentless pace? Late afternoon brought another test. A last-minute board call had been scheduled, overlapping with an important client briefing. Evelyn scanned both agendas, the pressure pressing on her chest like a physical weight. She mapped the conflict, anticipated potential missteps, and quietly rearranged the sequence to avoid confrontation. The calls went through seamlessly, with Daniel none the wiser to the precarious choreography that had just unfolded. Linda's approving glance reinforced the lesson. Adaptability mattered as much as efficiency, courage as much as skill. As the workday finally drew to a close, Evelyn leaned back in her chair for a brief moment of reflection. The bay glimmered in the late afternoon light through the glass windows, the water shimmering like an uncharted possibility. She felt the exhilaration of survival, tempered by the awareness that the trials had only begun. This environment, so far removed from her familiar routines, demanded more than competence. It demanded poise, insight, and an unshakable resilience she wasn't entirely sure she possessed yet. Evelyn packed her bag slowly, savoring the quiet end to the day. She knew she had managed to navigate the first series of tests, yet her mind remained vigilant. The approval she had earned, the tiny nods of recognition from Linda, and the knowledge that she had averted potential disaster, they were all temporary victories in a landscape she was only beginning to understand. Each success was a foothold, but the precipice loomed large above her. Stepping into the elevator, she pressed the button for the lobby, the reflection in the mirrored doors showing a woman both exhausted and quietly proud. Daniel's office had been a crucible, and she had survived the first trial. Yet the lingering question hovered in her mind like the evening fog over the bay. Had she truly proven she belonged, or had she only climbed far enough to fall harder? Tomorrow, Evelyn's hand lingered on the stack of color-coded schedules as she adjusted her coffee cup. The office lights were dimmer now, the hum of electronics the only sound punctuating the quiet of after hours. Weeks had passed in a blur of early mornings and late nights, each day a fragment of expectation and tiny victories. She had begun to notice the rhythm of Daniel's world, the subtleties that revealed more than he said aloud. The tap of a pen before he said no. The micro-pause before he decided to grant a request. She filed these little signals away, cataloging them in the quiet corners of her mind like someone reading the weather, the shifting climate of his moods. She paused to glance around his office, the space he vacated in the evenings. It was startlingly sparse, no family photos, only neat stacks of papers, a single-frame picture turned face down. The emptiness gave her a pang of curiosity, a mixture of intrigue and empathy. She imagined the life that had once filled it, the laughter and loss that now left a silent trace in the corners of the room. Evelyn knew she had to remember this was a job, that the personal spaces of others were off limits. But the thought lingered, a soft shadow across the back of her mind, whispering of vulnerability and trust. She was not sure she was ready to extend or receive. Her days flowed in a careful routine, checking calendars, sending reminders, coordinating schedules, and anticipating Daniel's needs. She had begun to anticipate his movements before he even made them, reading the subtle cues that hinted at fatigue or irritation. A slight furrow of the brow meant meetings would run longer. The quiet hum of his voice suggested openness to suggestions. There was a rhythm here, and Evelyn was learning to dance along without stumbling. It felt almost exhilarating to recognize the patterns, to discover that competence could build respect and sometimes the tiniest measure of influence. Then there were moments that caught her off guard. The first time she heard him laugh genuine, unrestrained, she nearly dropped her coffee. The sound carried across the office in the small, late-evening quiet, startling in its rarity and warmth. She blinked, disoriented by the humanity it revealed behind the polished exterior. Daniel's laughter was brief, a fleeting window into a life she had only glimpsed in the faintest ways. Yet it pulled at something she had carefully tucked away. She told herself it was work-related relief, nothing more. Yet her chest tightened with an unspoken curiosity she couldn't quite name. One evening, nearing the end of a particularly grueling day, Daniel appeared at her desk holding 2 takeout boxes. The smell of warm, familiar food made her stomach ache with relief, and she realized she had forgotten lunch entirely. "We both forget to eat when things get busy," he said, placing the boxes carefully in front of her. His voice was calm, casual, yet something in the delivery felt dangerously like care. Evelyn's mind whirled. Was this simply professional consideration, a nod to her diligence, or something more? She forced herself to focus on the practicality. She could be reading too much into a simple act. Still, the warmth lingered, mingling with exhaustion and the quiet thrill of being noticed, not merely observed. The night had settled in fully by the time she returned her attention to the schedules. She noted the subtle improvements in her own efficiency, fewer mistakes, quicker responses, and a confidence that felt both earned and fragile. She reflected on her own life, the slow rebuild after divorce, the careful navigation of boundaries between personal and professional. Daniel's presence was steady, yet unpredictable in its nuances, a puzzle she felt compelled to solve, piece by cautious piece. The balance she maintained, cautious detachment tempered by curiosity, was delicate, each day a tightrope between competence and entanglement. By late evening, she had mastered a small ritual aligning his notes, verifying itineraries, and making adjustments that preempted potential errors. Each time she succeeded, there was a subtle acknowledgement from Daniel, sometimes a glance, a quiet thank you, or a shift in his stance that suggested approval. These moments were tiny, almost imperceptible, yet they planted seeds of quiet admiration, a growing respect that made her chest both light and tense. She reminded herself to keep perspective. She was here to work, not to interpret signals as personal affection. Still, the line between diligence and emotional proximity was thinning, and she could not ignore it. Later, she found herself gazing out the windows at the city lights below, each flicker of life a reminder of the world beyond the office, beyond the meticulous schedules and careful interactions. Her own life, once predictable and measured, now felt punctuated with possibility, uncertainty, and a hint of something she had long resisted: hope. The rhythm of Daniel's world, once intimidating, had begun to feel navigable. She felt the pride of small victories mingled with the tension of uncharted territory, her mind turning over the day's lessons, the laughter, the shared meals, the quiet nods of approval. As she packed her bag for the night, her hands trembled slightly, not from exhaustion alone, but from the awareness that her connection with Daniel, however professional, had shifted imperceptibly. She had learned his patterns, anticipated his needs, and, perhaps unintentionally, stepped closer to understanding the man behind the CEO facade. Was this simply the recognition of a competent employee, or had the edges of their professional relationship begun to blur, quietly, imperceptibly, in ways she was not yet ready to define? The office lights dimmed further, and Evelyn took a final glance at the empty desk beside her. The quiet, the neat stacks, the single picture turned face down. They were symbols she did not yet fully understand, reminders that even in a world of power and precision, vulnerability persisted. She stepped into the elevator, fingers brushing the polished metal, and let the doors close, her reflection fragmented by the mirrored panels. The question hung in her mind as tangibly as the hum of the building around her: was this merely how he treated good employees, or was a line, subtle and deliberate, slowly beginning to shift? Evelyn's fingers tightened around the edge of the polished oak desk as the elevator dinged open. The scent hit her first, a crisp, floral perfume layered with something faintly metallic, and then the vision followed. Charlotte Blake stepped out, heels clicking on the marble floor, shoulders back, posture flawless. She was mid-30s, the kind of woman who seemed born to glide through this world, every detail polished, every hair in place, every smile measured. Evelyn's reflection in the elevator mirrored back her own slightly rumpled blazer, her hair pressed flat from a day of endless movement, and for the first time, she felt the weight of all her small imperfections. Charlotte's eyes immediately found Daniel, warm but predatory, and she smiled in a way that suggested familiarity, a shared history. "Dan," she said, as if no one else in the room existed, ignoring the polite formality of his office. Evelyn flinched at the intimacy in the tone, a kind of quiet ownership, and Daniel's shoulders tensed just imperceptibly. She reminded herself to breathe, to keep her focus. Yet the air seemed suddenly heavier, charged with an energy she could not name. Charlotte's charm was effortless, but edged with something Evelyn could not place: a subtle condescension, a reminder that she did not quite belong here. She glanced at Evelyn, her blue eyes twinkling with feigned warmth. "I hear you've been brave to step into such a demanding role at this stage," she said, voice airy, light, but carrying a sting hidden beneath the compliment. Evelyn forced a small smile, wishing she could match the effortless confidence that seemed to radiate from Charlotte, wishing she could stop comparing herself, wishing she could stop noticing the lines on her face and the gray at her temples. Charlotte moved with purpose toward the main office, mentioning the Wesley deal casually, almost offhandedly, discussing confidential acquisition strategies as though she had already been privy to every briefing. Evelyn listened, biting back questions and comments, aware that any misstep could mark her as inexperienced. Her mind raced. Had she already overstepped by being visible in the office? Was she just a placeholder, a temporary patch until Charlotte returned? The thought gnawed at her, a quiet fear threading through her chest, tightening with every word Charlotte spoke. Daniel, calm yet firm, introduced Charlotte briefly, maintaining his usual composed demeanor. Charlotte's back to consult on the Wesley acquisition, he said evenly. Evelyn nodded, feeling herself shrink inwardly as Charlotte's presence filled the room with effortless authority. Every detail of Charlotte's appearance, her polished gestures, the way she laughed lightly but with precision, seemed designed to intimidate, and Evelyn could not help noticing how small she felt in comparison. She reminded herself, "This is your job, Evelyn. Keep your focus. Don't let insecurity dictate your actions." Yet the tension persisted. All day, Charlotte's presence hovered over Evelyn's tasks like a shadow, a constant reminder that she might be easily replaced, overlooked, invisible. Even the office lights seemed brighter, harsher, as if emphasizing flaws that had always been there but were now amplified under scrutiny. Evelyn moved through her assignments with care, watching Daniel closely, noting his subtle reactions, the slight furrow in his brow, the tightened jaw when Charlotte suggested minor adjustments. It was a dance of awareness. One misstep could be costly, and she felt the weight of it in her chest. By evening, Evelyn found herself alone briefly, taking a moment to catch her breath at Daniel's desk. The soft glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows, stretching the tension across the room. And then, by accident or fate, her eyes fell on his laptop screen. An email from Charlotte blinked in her inbox, subject line hinting at ambitions to take a more visible role in the company again. Her heart sank. Daniel's cursor hovered over the reply button, a silent tension that stretched seconds into a heartbeat too long, before he quietly closed the laptop. No words, no acknowledgement, but the message had landed. Evelyn's chest tightened, a cold realization settling over her that the balance she had worked so hard to maintain might now be threatened by a ghost from Daniel's past. She stepped back, exhaling slowly, trying to make sense of the mix of emotions rising in her: insecurity, worry, the faint stir of jealousy she despised herself for feeling. Was Charlotte back for the work, the power, or something else entirely? And where did that leave her, standing at the edge of the familiar and the precarious, trying to prove herself in a world that suddenly felt both larger and colder? She pressed her hands to her thighs, forcing a steadying breath, aware that tonight's quiet tension had shifted the landscape, and that she would need to navigate it carefully, or risk losing the footing she had painstakingly built. The elevator's hum seemed distant now, the polished floors reflecting 1,000 unasked questions. Evelyn turned toward the window, catching her reflection once again in the darkened glass. Anne wondered, with a quiet ache, if competence alone could secure her place, or if some other unspoken force had already begun to tilt the scales. Evelyn's morning began with an unexpected jolt, the kind that tightens the chest and leaves the mind racing. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the kitchen counter, a stream of alerts she had learned to ignore over years of navigating news cycles and office crises. But today was different. Headlines blared from multiple financial news sites. Wesley acquisition details leaked: numbers, timelines, strategies, everything laid bare as though the memo had been printed in Times Square. Evelyn's coffee trembled in her hand. Her throat went dry. She could see the exact bullet points from the private memo she had filed just yesterday, the same one she had printed and placed carefully on Daniel's desk. The world seemed to tilt slightly, the kitchen lights glaringly bright against her pale face. Her mind spun. Did I leave it unsecured? Did I mention anything in the wrong meeting? By the time she stepped into Coal Industries, the office was buzzing with low murmurs, the tension thick enough to taste. Daniel's normally composed demeanor was taut, measured, with the faintest crease in his forehead betraying irritation, or worry, or perhaps both. The board members were already gathering in hushed clusters, exchanging clipped words that made her ears ring, some voiced, under their breath, concerns that Daniel had become careless since his wife's death, that he was relying too heavily on inexperienced help. Evelyn felt herself shrink, a phantom arrow of suspicion aimed squarely in her direction, though no one said it aloud. Her palms grew sweaty as she gripped the edge of her desk, thinking of all the minor missteps she had made, even though none had yet caused catastrophe. The office seemed suddenly enormous, the polished floors reflecting fluorescent light with a cold glare. Evelyn's memory raced back to every mistake from past roles, old voices echoing, "When something breaks, you are the easiest person to blame." She could see herself, years earlier, stuck in a cramped office, eyes welling as supervisors pointed fingers, colleagues looking away. And now, that same helpless feeling threatened to rise again. She felt the familiar urge to shrink into the shadows, to make herself invisible, to let the storm pass over her. But then, a shard of clarity cut through her panic. "I am better than this," she told herself, holding her coffee cup like a talisman. Her thoughts returned to Charlotte, the woman who had appeared polished, confident, and seemingly untouchable in the office just days ago. She remembered Charlotte borrowing the memo, just for a moment, during her visit. At first, Evelyn had dismissed it as casual curiosity, a trivial interaction in the sea of office dynamics. But now, staring at the leaked information on her laptop, that moment replayed in her mind with a new, cutting significance. Charlotte. Could it have been her? The weight of that possibility pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. Evelyn's heart pounded, each beat threatening to betray her outward composure. She felt anger mixed with disbelief, a tight knot of betrayal that she had not anticipated. She had trusted Charlotte, had even found herself respecting the polished professional despite her insecurity. And yet, here it was, a betrayal that cut through that trust with the precision of a scalpel. Daniel approached, his steps measured, the quiet authority he commanded even in moments of tension undeniable. "Evelyn," he said, voice steady, but with an undercurrent of concern. "Did you—" His gaze fell to the open news page. She saw the flash of recognition in his eyes. A question silently asked, a trust subtly challenged. Evelyn swallowed hard, weighing every word before she spoke, aware that a single wrong syllable could tilt the precarious balance of her position. Her mind spun through the possibilities, confront Charlotte directly and risk looking petty, or wait and see, but risk further betrayal, tell Daniel now, showing loyalty but also exposing her vulnerability, or stay silent to avoid seeming jealous or insecure. Each option carried its own peril, and the seconds stretched interminably as the hum of office chatter filled the silence between them. Evelyn's fingers tightened around her notebook, the familiar leather cover grounding her slightly, a reminder that she had survived challenges before and could navigate this one too if she could summon the courage. The day unfolded like a slow-motion sequence. Every email, every glance from Charlotte, every subtle interaction magnified against the backdrop of fear. Evelyn moved carefully, balancing professionalism with a simmering tension that she fought to keep hidden. She checked and rechecked her own work, ensuring no detail could be used as a pretext for blame. Every keystroke and document filed meticulously. The office seemed to shrink around her as she navigated the delicate dance of competence and caution, the looming question of Charlotte's intentions ever present, even when she paused for a brief moment at the window, watching the city wake below her, the sun catching on the glass towers. She could not shake the gnawing unease. The reflection staring back at her seemed uncertain, cautious, a mirror of the fear and doubt threading through her chest. Evelyn wondered, quietly, desperately, did I just stumble into a trap? Or is this the moment that will define whether I belong in this world? As the day edged toward evening, she returned to her desk, eyes flicking to the locked door of Daniel's office, wondering if the conversation she knew she needed to have would ever happen, or if silence would become the safer path. Every instinct urged her to act, yet every ounce of caution warned her to wait, to measure, to survive. The office lights hummed overhead, casting long shadows, and Evelyn realized the first true test of her tenure had arrived, one that had nothing to do with efficiency or spreadsheets, and everything to do with trust, courage, and navigating a world that now seemed more treacherous than she had ever imagined. The tension coiled inside her as she sat, hands folded, breath shallow, staring at the screen. She knew that whatever choice she made next could tilt the balance of her career, and perhaps something more personal too. Her heart refused to settle, her mind refusing to quiet should she confront Charlotte, warn Daniel, or hold her counsel and watch. The question lingered in the room, as heavy and silent as the city skyline at dusk, each possibility stretching forward, unresolved, demanding a decision she was not yet ready to make. Evelyn's palms were clammy as she followed Daniel into the high-floor conference room, the city sprawling beneath them in a lattice of lights and motion. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and cold air from the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the sheer height made her stomach lurch slightly. She had attended countless board meetings in her career, but none like this, none where her presence was this visible, this consequential. An emergency session had been called, and the board's mood was already icy before she even stepped in. Daniel stood at the head of the table, poised and steady, a calm anchor amidst the tense murmurs. The board members, a mix of sharp suits and older authority, had questions lined up like weapons. Their glances flicked toward Evelyn occasionally, assessing, evaluating, testing her presence in the room. She felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the old, insistent voice that whispered, "Stay out of it. Say nothing. You will only make it worse." She clenched her notebook tightly, inhaling a breath that seemed to pull courage from somewhere deep, untested until this moment. The meeting began with a volley of questions directed at Daniel, subtle accusations wrapped in polished language. Given the internal leak, "Mr. Cole, are you confident in your team's ability to handle sensitive materials?" one board member asked, voice clipped. Another chimed in, hinting that the Wesley acquisition might be delayed or even reconsidered. Daniel remained steady, shoulders squared, eyes calm, as he explained that he believed the breach came from outside the trusted circle of his staff, his tone neither defensive nor fearful. Evelyn felt the tension in the room coil tighter around her, a weight pressing on her chest. Her mind raced as the words and glances hit her in turn. If I stay silent, I will regret it. If I speak, I risk everything: my job, my reputation, the fragile trust I've built. The old patterns, decades of being warned not to intervene, not to make waves, threatened to take over. But a tiny spark inside her refused to be silenced. She shifted slightly in her chair, feeling the pounding of her heart echo in her ears. Then, almost before she could stop herself, the words slipped out. "Excuse me, may I say something?" Her voice sounded steadier than she felt, and a hush fell across the room as all eyes turned toward her. The board members raised brows, Daniel's expression subtle yet encouraging, a quiet signal that she had permission to step forward. She drew a slow breath, framing her explanation with calm precision. Evelyn outlined the chain of custody for the memo, her voice measured and factual. She recounted Charlotte's brief access, making no assumptions about intent, no personal attacks, just the facts, the sequence of events, the verified access points. She emphasized that Daniel had acted swiftly once aware of the issue, implementing tighter security protocols and treating the leaks with the seriousness it deserved. The room's atmosphere shifted subtly, the board members' posture relaxed, the tone of their questions softened. As she spoke, Evelyn felt an unfamiliar warmth, the sensation of power not flaunted but earned. The board member who had looked through her as if she were invisible now nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the clarity she provided. A quiet authority settled over her as she continued, articulating the delicate balance between accountability and action without faltering. She could feel the old, familiar fears warring with this new strength, a tension that made her pulse quicken with exhilaration and disbelief. When she finished, the silence that followed was filled with the subtle hum of realization. Daniel's eyes met hers, a glint of quiet approval in them that went beyond professional acknowledgement. He gestured briefly, as if to say, "Well done." Evelyn exhaled, a mixture of relief and adrenaline coursing through her. The room seemed suddenly lighter, the pressure slightly eased. Though the stakes had not diminished, they had merely shifted. The meeting concluded with procedural formalities, but Evelyn noticed the difference in the room's energy. Her voice had made an impact. Her observations had redirected suspicion, and she had done so without undermining anyone else. She realized, with a small, fluttering sense of awe, that she had crossed a line she had once believed she could never approach. Speaking up in spaces that once terrified her, standing firmly on her own knowledge, had altered her own perception. After the last board member filed out, Daniel lingered by the window, overlooking the city lights that had seemed so vast and intimidating earlier. He turned slightly, voice quiet, carrying that rare blend of warmth and gravity that made Evelyn catch her breath. "You did not just defend me, you stood up for yourself too," he said softly. Those words landed differently than praise. There was weight to them, as though he recognized not only the facts she had conveyed, but the courage it had taken to speak them. Evelyn felt the full arc of the morning settle into her chest: fear, calculation, courage, and now a tentative pride that flickered like candlelight in the otherwise sterile boardroom. She looked out at the city, the skyline vast and endless, and wondered at the small, personal victory she had carved for herself in a space that had once loomed like an insurmountable mountain. A shift had occurred, not a dramatic upheaval, but a quiet, undeniable change in her own sense of possibility. And as Daniel's eyes met hers once more, lingering with unspoken acknowledgement, Evelyn felt the room contract around them, the distance between professional and personal narrowing just slightly. She wondered if he recognized the depth of the transformation she felt, or if he simply saw her as the competent assistant who had saved the day. Either way, a line had been crossed, a new space of mutual respect had been claimed, and she felt the possibility of more. The question remained, suspended in the quiet of the room: how would this newfound courage shape not only her role, but the fragile, unspoken connection that had been building between them? The hallway outside the conference rooms was eerily quiet, the fluorescent lights humming a steady, almost hypnotic note above her head. Evelyn felt the cool linoleum beneath her feet, the faint scent of polished wood and coffee lingering in the air. She had followed Charlotte to this narrow corridor after noticing her lingering near the executive offices, the sharp click of heels announcing her presence. Evelyn's heart thumped, not with fear, but with a strange, hardening focus. Charlotte turned, her perfectly tailored blazer crisp, her hair flawless. She smiled, the kind of smile that carried a subtle edge of superiority, and addressed Evelyn as though speaking to someone temporarily tolerated. "Evelyn," she said, her tone smooth and deliberately patronizing, "I hope you understand how complicated this situation really is." Evelyn paused, steadying herself against the wall, feeling the tension coil in her chest. She could feel every second stretch, the silence of the corridor amplifying her pulse. This was not a stage for drama or theatrics. It was a private moment to set the record straight. Her palms pressed lightly against the leather of her portfolio as she spoke, voice calm but firm. "Charlotte, let's be clear. Here's the timeline. Who saw what, and what was printed when." She laid it out simply, without accusation, just facts. The chain of events she had meticulously tracked. Charlotte's eyes flickered, a flash of impatience. "You think you can tell me how things happened? You're out of your depth here. Do you even understand the implications of what you're claiming? Her tone, meant to intimidate, only made Evelyn's spine straighten further. Inside Evelyn, a storm of emotions surged, memories of years spent shrinking in offices, apologizing for mistakes that weren't hers, doubting her worth. But she quelled the urge to flinch, to apologize, to diminish herself as she had so many times before. Instead, she took a measured breath and said, "If you wanted your old life back, Charlotte, there were cleaner ways than trying to ruin mine." The words left her mouth with a clarity she hadn't anticipated, ringing in the quiet corridor with the weight of finality. Charlotte's mask faltered, a micro-expression of anger flitting across her features before she quickly replaced it with practiced poise. "You're bold," she said, with a forced laugh that sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Let's see how long it lasts." Evelyn did not respond. She felt no need to escalate, no desire to justify herself further. The truth, she realized, had a power of its own. The mini-climax of the moment came not in words, but in subtle observation. Around the corner, Daniel stood, having lingered quietly after leaving the meeting room. He had caught a fragment of the conversation, Evelyn's calm assertion, Charlotte's flinch, the undeniable moral clarity in the younger woman's stance. He watched silently, a slight tightening of his jaw betraying his appreciation and a quiet approval that needed no words. The weight of authority in his gaze met hers when she glanced briefly down the corridor, a silent acknowledgement that she had stood her ground in a way that even he respected. Evelyn's internal struggle did not vanish entirely. She still felt the faint tremor in her hands, the residual adrenaline, the echo of every "you're not enough" lesson ever whispered to her in corporate halls. Yet, there was a strange release in the steadiness of her breathing, a recognition that she had chosen a new path, standing tall, letting facts speak and refusing to shrink. The corridor, once just a neutral space, now seemed like a place of empowerment, where she could claim authority over her own story. In the days that followed, subtle shifts occurred. Charlotte's consulting contract was quietly terminated, a clean break with no confrontation, no spectacle. It was as though the universe had acknowledged Evelyn's calm but unyielding integrity. The office dynamic began to change. Colleagues looked at her differently, a little more attentive, a little more respectful. Evelyn noticed these nuances without vanity, aware that respect earned quietly often lasted longer than any overt display of skill. Yet, the cliffhanger loomed in the small, intimate moments between her and Daniel. One evening, as the office emptied and the hum of the building settled into a soft silence, Daniel asked her to stay behind. "Evelyn," he said, voice low, measured, "I'd like to talk about where we go from here." The words were casual on the surface, professional in tone, but the way they lingered in the dim light, the subtle way he met her gaze, suggested there was more at stake than scheduling or workflow. Evelyn left the hallway later that evening, with a mixture of satisfaction and curiosity. She had confronted Charlotte, asserted her moral clarity, and maintained her dignity. The corridor had not witnessed a shouting match or dramatic fallout, just the quiet, resonant power of truth. And now, she found herself wondering about Daniel's words, about the possibilities they hinted at, and about the lines she had crossed tonight, the boundaries between professional courage and personal connection, the space between standing tall and being seen for who she truly was. As she collected her coat and glanced one last time at the now empty corridor, the quiet hum of the lights felt different. It was no longer just background noise. It was a steady drum of empowerment, the sound of a woman claiming her space in the world that had once seemed vast and intimidating. The future was uncertain, as it always is, but for the first time in years, Evelyn felt that she was not merely reacting to circumstances, she was shaping them. And Daniel's request for a conversation later that evening lingered in her mind. A question she could not yet answer. Would it be strictly business, or was something entirely new beginning to unfold between them? The small bell above the restaurant door chimed as Evelyn stepped inside, the familiar scent of garlic, roasted herbs, and fresh bread immediately wrapping around her like a comforting old sweater. The place was modest, family-run, with dim lighting casting golden pools across the polished wooden tables. She could hear the faint chatter of a few couples and the clinking of cutlery, and yet, somehow, the space felt intimate, almost removed from the world outside. Daniel led the way, his presence calm but deliberate, as though he had been returning here for years, even if he admitted otherwise. "This is where I used to come with Claire," he said softly, settling into a corner booth. The name, spoken quietly, carried a weight Evelyn felt in her chest. He continued, almost to himself, "I haven't been back since she passed." His fingers absently traced the rim of his glass, and the motion seemed both habitual and lonely. Evelyn nodded, the words she wanted to say caught in the throat that still ached from years of saying too little, too softly. She watched him glance around, taking in the worn photographs on the walls, the handwritten menu taped in one corner, and for a moment, it felt like peering into someone else's memory, intimate and fragile. The waiter approached, but Daniel waved him away. "Let's not rush," he said. "Tonight, it's not about orders or schedules." He gestured to the table, and Evelyn settled in across from him, feeling the candlelight flicker across the lines of his face. The soft glow highlighted the faint shadow under his eyes, the remnants of long nights spent managing his empire alone. They started with light conversation, at first about mundane things, traffic, the unpredictability of the weather, but gradually. The dialogue deepened. He spoke about aging, about the children growing up and leaving the nest, the quiet that fills a house once full of life. Evelyn mentioned her own daughter's college plans, the subtle ache of milestones that come too quickly, the sense of a life that continues even when part of you is left behind. The air was warm, yet heavy with unspoken grief and the strange, liberating freedom that loss sometimes brings. Daniel leaned back, a rare, almost shy smile breaking across his face. "Watching you at the board meeting, I realized I'm not the only one trying to rebuild from the rubble," he said, his voice low, steady, carrying a vulnerability that few had seen in him. Evelyn's chest tightened. She recognized that same quiet fear of exposure, of stepping out from behind the carefully constructed walls of one's life. Internal conflict gnawed at her. Every laugh she let slip felt like a risk, a crack in the armor that had kept her safe in the professional world for so long. She realized, with an unfamiliar flutter, that she had not laughed this freely in years. The sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating. Could she allow herself to feel this lightness without jeopardizing the delicate balance between personal and professional? The candle between them burned low, the wax dripping slowly onto the brass holder. Their plates remained mostly untouched, the meal secondary to the quiet communion forming between them. Evelyn felt herself leaning just slightly forward, drawn by the sincerity of his words, by the ease with which he spoke of loss and survival, by the simple act of sharing. Each glance, each pause, seemed laden with meaning, as if the space around them recognized the rarity of this connection. After the final sip of wine, Daniel rose to walk her to the car. The evening air was cool against their skin, a gentle reminder of the world outside the cocoon of the restaurant. He walked beside her, hands loosely brushing against the leather strap of her bag, a proximity that spoke of intimacy without expectation. "Evelyn," he said softly, stopping at the car, "I want to thank you." She blinked, expecting the usual professional acknowledgement, but his words carried a weight that went beyond work. "Not for what you did today, not even for the board meeting, but for waking up parts of this life I thought were gone for good, for a heartbeat." The world seemed to shrink around them. Evelyn could almost feel the pull of the moment, the quiet possibility suspended between them. A kiss could have happened, an acknowledgement of mutual longing, of two hearts cautiously opening after years of caution and restraint. Instead, he gently touched her hand, a brief, deliberate connection, and let it go. The gesture lingered, echoing in the hollow spaces of both their hearts. Evelyn exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and wonder coursing through her. The streets outside seemed quieter than usual, The distant hum of traffic softened by the night. She watched him walk back toward the dimly lit entrance of the restaurant, a small silhouette fading into the glow, leaving her with the warmth of shared understanding and the weight of unspoken possibilities. Her fingers lingered on her steering wheel, tracing the familiar leather, wondering if caution was an act of wisdom or cowardice. She had crossed an emotional line tonight, shared laughter and quiet confession, and felt seen in a way that was both intoxicating and terrifying. Could they navigate the fragile boundary between personal connection and professional decorum? And if they did, what might lie ahead for both of them? The city lights shimmered against the windshield, reflections dancing like tiny memories, each one a small testament to the possibility of new beginnings. Evelyn started the engine, but the sensation of the evening, the shared vulnerability, the hesitant longing remained, pressing softly against the walls she had built around herself. And as she drove home, the question echoed quietly in her mind. Would either of them have the courage to let this delicate connection grow? Or would prudence once again dictate the distance between two hearts cautiously emerging from years of solitude? The office was silent, the usual hum of fluorescent lights replaced by the quiet tick of the clock and the distant city murmurs below. Evelyn stood near the window, looking out at the twinkling lights of the bay, each reflection a tiny, fragmented star. Her hands rested lightly on the ledge, but her mind raced, replaying the events of the past few weeks, moments of careful professionalism, tiny gestures of care, stolen glances across the open-plan office, the subtle acknowledgement that their connection was growing, despite the constraints of propriety. Daniel was at his desk, the soft glow of the desk lamp carving out a small island of light amidst the polished wood and glass of his office. The rest of the staff had left hours ago, leaving only the quiet of late evening and the scent of lingering coffee. He leaned back in his chair, a half-smile playing at the corners of his mouth, eyes reflecting a mix of relief and apprehension. Evelyn turned slowly, feeling her chest tighten with anticipation and a faint flutter of nervous excitement. "I've been trying not to feel this," he began, voice low but steady, "because it's complicated, because I'm afraid of gossip, afraid of hurting you, afraid of betraying everything I've built in the past years." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang between them, a tense bridge suspended over unspoken possibilities. Evelyn felt her own pulse accelerate, the familiar battle between caution and desire waging inside her. She had played this careful game for weeks, keeping her emotions in check, her words measured, her presence professional, but the truth of her own heart could no longer be restrained. She wanted to speak, to confess, yet feared she might be crossing a line she could never uncross. The light from the lamp caught the edges of her hair, the faint lines of her face, the hints of fatigue and determination. She began, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. "I didn't just come to your estate for a job." Her eyes met his, holding steady despite the tremor in her voice. "I came because I was afraid my life was already over. You made me feel like it wasn't." A pause stretched between them, filled only by the subtle ticking and the faint rustle of papers as Daniel shifted in his seat. The words hung in the air, fragile yet undeniable, a declaration of hope and fear intertwined. He leaned forward slightly, the shadows of the room accentuating the earnestness in his gaze. "I felt it too," he admitted. "Every time I look at you, every time you help steady things, I try to ignore it. I try to push it away. But it's there. And I don't want to lose it, even if it's risky." Evelyn felt a warmth spread through her chest, the careful layers of self-protection softening for just a moment. This wasn't a reckless infatuation, she realized. It was recognition of mutual strength, of shared vulnerability. She had been cautious, fearful of being judged, of crossing boundaries that could never be uncrossed. But here, in the quiet glow of the office, the risks seemed worth taking. They both knew the stakes, the potential to disrupt not just careers, but carefully reconstructed lives, but the choice was deliberate. "I don't know what this means," she said, her voice gaining steadiness as she spoke the truth she had been holding back. I don't know what comes next, but I know this feels real, not sudden, not shallow. Real. Her eyes searched his for any sign of hesitation, of regret, but found only mirrored recognition and cautious hope. Daniel reached out, resting a hand lightly on the desk near hers. A silent but grounding gesture. "Then we proceed carefully," he said, his tone deliberate, measured, yet infused with something tender. "We see where this goes, together, and we protect what we've rebuilt along the way." Evelyn felt the tension ease slightly, the knot of anxiety in her stomach loosening just enough to allow a fragile smile. It wasn't reckless, it wasn't naive, it was intentional. They had acknowledged the risks, counted the potential costs, and chosen to move forward anyway. The glow of the lamp reflected in their eyes, catching the unspoken promise, a tentative, deliberate step into something new, something that had the potential to heal as much as it could challenge. The night stretched on, quiet and unhurried, the city below, indifferent to the confession unfolding in a single office perched above the bay. For the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt a sense of clarity and alignment, heart and mind finally in dialogue. She had chosen to stand, to speak, to acknowledge what had long been simmering under the surface. And in that moment, the world felt simultaneously vast and intimate, each small decision echoing in the soft glow of the room. Yet, even as they allowed themselves this pause, this acknowledgement of something deeper, the question remained suspended: if they move forward together, can their lives accommodate this new love without fracturing the carefully reconstructed worlds they had both labored to rebuild? It was an open-ended thought, unanswerable for now, but it did not diminish the significance of the step they had just taken. They had crossed the line of fear into honesty, and the consequences, whatever they might be, would have to be faced together. The lamp flickered once, a shadow crossing the room, as if reminding them that night was fleeting, but the warmth between them lingered. Each heartbeat echoed the weight of their choice, each breath a subtle affirmation that they were no longer merely colleagues navigating a professional hierarchy. They were two people daring to let their lives intersect, against the odds. With all the care and courage such a choice demanded, Evelyn paused at the end of the driveway, the familiar Cole estate stretching out before her under the soft glow of evening lights. It was gala night, but the nerves that had once made her clutch her resume tightly were gone. Tonight, she wasn't an outsider. She wasn't even just staff. She was Daniel's partner, a quiet acknowledgement of the life they had built together over the past year. Her heels clicked gently against the stone path, a measured sound that felt both grounding and celebratory, echoing the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. The house seemed different, as if it had aged with grace rather than grandeur. Photos adorned the walls where stark white spaces had once dominated, soft. Golden light spilled from sconces, painting familiar corners in warmth rather than intimidation. Linda, Daniel's assistant, now teasing her with that familiar blend of affection and mockery, called out from the foyer. "Well, look who decided to show up as part of the furniture." Evelyn smiled, feeling a sense of belonging she had never imagined possible last year. Daniel appeared at the top of the grand staircase, his dark suit tailored but casual, eyes lighting up as they met hers. He offered his arm, and she took it, letting herself be guided effortlessly through the crowd of guests who now knew her. Not as a mistake, not as a misplaced employee, but as someone integral to Daniel's life and work. She exchanged quiet nods, gentle smiles, and brief handshakes, her presence no longer a source of embarrassment, but of subtle acknowledgement. They eventually made their way to the terrace, the same terrace where she had once stood alone, staring at the city lights below with a mix of wonder and despair. The night air felt different now, less intimidating, softer against her cheeks. She breathed it in, letting the cool breeze mingle with the warmth in her chest. Daniel leaned lightly against the railing, glancing at her with a look that spoke of shared memories, challenges overcome, and the quiet thrill of survival. "I can't believe I'm here," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, though she had said similar words in private reflection many times over the past year. "I mean, really here?" Her gaze swept over the terrace, the distant city, the soft hum of laughter from inside. It was the same view, yet everything felt transformed, not the landscape, but herself. Daniel smiled, his hand brushing lightly against hers. "You've earned every step," he said, "and you've made this us, something that matters." His words, steady and unassuming, carried a gravity she felt deep in her chest. There was no fanfare, no grand gesture, just the quiet assertion that they had both changed the meaning of the space and their lives. Evelyn let herself lean into the moment, remembering the woman who had walked up the long driveway a year ago, anxious, out of place, unsure of her own worth. That woman had been thrust through a wrong door and forced to navigate uncertainty, embarrassment, and self-doubt. And here she stood, no longer defined by error, but by choice, by courage, by resilience. Every late night, every careful calculation, every small act of bravery had brought her here. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and produced a small, heavy key. "For the house," he said softly, handing it to her, "and for the rest of this life, if you still want it." Evelyn's fingers closed around it, feeling the weight of the metal, the weight of trust, and the quiet promise embedded in the gesture. It was not a ring, not an ostentatious display of wealth or love, just a steady, deliberate symbol of partnership, of shared future, of recognition that they had both endured and chosen. She glanced at the mansion, its stately form softened by time and light, remembering the overwhelming grandeur that had once made her feel small and insignificant. And now she realized it was just a building, a backdrop to life rather than life itself. What mattered was the man beside her, the woman she had become, and the choices that had led her here. The breeze carried faint laughter and the muted clink of glasses from inside, but Evelyn let her gaze linger on the darkened garden paths and the soft reflections of city lights in the bay. For a moment, she allowed herself to reflect on the years lost to doubt and the steps she had taken forward. How many doors had she walked past because she assumed they weren't meant for her? How many moments had she hesitated, waiting for certainty that never came? And yet, here she was, proof that missteps could become gateways, that wrong turns could lead to the right life if met with courage. Daniel squeezed her hand gently, drawing her back from her reverie. "Shall we go inside?" he asked, voice carrying that same calm, unwavering steadiness that had guided her through so many storms. Evelyn nodded, allowing herself to step forward, carrying the quiet joy of belonging, the satisfaction of a journey completed, and the delicate thrill of a life still unfolding in new and unexpected ways. As they entered the estate together, the warmth from inside enveloped them. Evelyn felt the gentle certainty of shared history and the subtle excitement of the unknown future. 1 year ago, a wrong door had threatened to define her night. Tonight, she had stepped through it and found the life she had been searching for all along. The city lights glittered beyond the terrace windows, but inside, there was a light that mattered far more, the one they had kindled together, steady, bright, and enduring. And as the evening stretched on, Evelyn held the key lightly in her hand, a tangible reminder that doors literal and figurative were never truly closed. Some simply waited for the right moment, the right person, and the courage to step through. And she had stepped through, fully, deliberately, with a heart open to both the quiet comfort of the present and the lingering possibilities of the future. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, in moments that feel small or even wrong at first. A single step through the wrong door can ripple into a life you never imagined, reminding us that courage often looks like simply showing up. Life does not hand out perfect invitations, and the paths we take are rarely straight. What matters is the quiet choices we make when fear and uncertainty press close, choosing to stay, to speak, or to trust ourselves enough to keep moving forward. It's in those choices that we find resilience, not as a loud declaration, but as a soft, steady pulse beneath the surface of our lives. And sometimes, the people who seem to hold power or influence are simply mirrors, showing us the strength we've already carried within ourselves. Trusting that, even when the world seems larger than we are, can open us to unexpected connection, tenderness, and the subtle warmth of a life gently reclaimed. It's okay to take a breath. Notice the quiet moments, and let the small victories carry you forward. Life often unfolds in ways we never saw coming, and yet feels exactly like home when we do. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story. Your presence here truly matters and adds warmth to this shared moment. If you feel moved, a like, share, or subscribe is a simple way to spread kindness and keep stories like this alive. Wishing you gentle moments and quiet joy until we meet again.